Wow. Right now we're looking at what they call local natives of the Cocle province in Panama. This is footage from the 1940s, colorized, showing the local people how they're helping conduct these excavations, archaeological excavations, from this very ancient site that we're going to read about today. Now, they like to tell us, like always, that the people from this ancient site are long gone and extinct, or have disappeared and vanished. So dodge the hijack big time. Because a lot of the people there, these so-called local natives, are not African, and they're not all foreigners. A lot of these people carry the blood of the ancient people who made the things, the gold artifacts, the monuments, the megalithic structures that we're about to read about in this ancient land of Panama. An unknown site left out of history, something they just encountered in the 1900s and left it under the rug. The vast amount of gold and artifacts, the amount of tombs, the wealth, the advanced knowledge these people had of architecture, pottery design, something that's never talked about. This site, as we're going to read today, is possibly up to 12,000 years old as Göbekli Tepe. You can see these modern day looters, they call themselves archaeologists. They're just looting all the gold out of these burial tombs, desecrating the tombs. We're going to read today. We're going to see how they desecrated all these tombs. So many people going there and looting and taking all the gold that they find here. As you guys can see, this goes very low. We're going to see how low this goes, how old this is. Many layers of soil and dirt and volcanic ash over this site in many parts. This is old. You have to dig down to get into it. You have to dig really far down. Parts have up to 9 feet of volcanic ash accumulation or lava. You're going to read today. Alright, so before we begin reading about this region of Panama, just want to remind everybody what we already know, what Vasco Núñez de Balboa, this conquistador, right, dodged the hijack with the whitewash images and the terms when they use Negro or white or whatever they're using. But I want to show you that they are admitting that in this region, very close to the Gran Cocle site, we have eyewitness accounts of these conquistadors, so-called conquistadors, right? Stating that they saw so-called Negroes when they got to Panama. All right, I'm going to show you the primary source. This is a book written by Francisco Lopez de Gomara, all right, a famous historian, Spanish historian, all right. He lived during the colonial times, the conquista times, 1500s, right? This book right here, this version is from 1554, as it says here. This is the cover. It's in Spanish, La Historia General de las Indias, or the General History of the Indias. If you go to page 84 in this book, as you guys can see here, this is very old Spanish, so it's written really different. But it tells you that when Balboa was in Cuareca or Curaquea, that was an old town and colonial towns in Panama, in that Darien region. It says he didn't find gold, no halló oro, but the emperor found some Negroes, algunos negros, halló algunos negros, esclavos del señor, who were servants of the cacique. He asked the cacique where did he get them, and they didn't know how to tell him, or he didn't understand, other than that there's men of that color very close to there, and that they have a lot of war with them ordinarily, so they're always warring with them. It says these were the first Negroes. Estos fueron los primeros negros que se vieron en las Indias, that was seen in the Indias. All right, that's the hijack. Because you got to understand that a lot of these conquistadors, Sephardic Jews and Moorish, they are people of color. Maybe they're different than the people they're seeing. I just want to show you guys that there was already so-called black people in this area when the conquistadors and the Europeans arrived. This is the same book. This is the same book which is available in text form. So I just want to grab this part right here and bring it over to Google Translate. All right, so it detected Spanish. This is the English version. Balboa entered Cuareca. Again, that's in Panama, very close to the site. He found neither bread nor gold, which had been raised before fighting. But he found some black slaves of the Lord. He asked where they were from, and they did not know how to say or understand more than that there were men of that color near there, with whom they had very ordinary war. All right, they weren't foreigners. They had a history with these people. There's men of that color nearby. They lived there. They didn't say they were Africans or foreigners. They would have told them right away, right? These were the first blacks to be seen in the Indies. Touch the hijack. And I still think that no more have been seen. To see what I'm saying? So that's why I say dodge the hijack. But they're giving you an account. All right, so I just wanted you guys to see that for yourselves. Again, there was already so-called Negroes in Panama when the conquistadors arrived. All right, we're in the book right now. It's called America's Ancient Civilizations by Hyatt Verrill and Ruth Verrill. Go to chapter 11, page 125, and it says here, the puzzling culture of Cocle. Gonna be going over this ancient site here in Panama. Could we but know the stories of these past civilizations, we would no doubt find they had most tragic and most romantic histories. Unfortunately, their stories are usually buried with their long dead people, and only now then do we find evidences that enable us to guess as to their fate. Such is the case with the Cocle culture, which I discovered in Panama in 1924. Although I refer to it as a culture, yet it is so far beyond other mere cultures in many ways that it may almost be considered a civilization. In many respects, it is essentially different from all other known American cultures. In other respects, it shows remarkably striking similarities with such cultures and civilizations as the Nicoya. All right, that's here in Costa Rica. And Nicoya was actually a chief or cacique, and they took his name. These are the Chorotega people. Nicoya became the Nicoya Peninsula, named after him. The Maya and the pre-Incan. Although nothing definite is known as to its history, its age, the race it represents, or anything regarding it, other than what we can surmise from the objects and artifacts uncovered and from a study of the remains, yet there are good reasons for considering it one of the most ancient of known advanced cultures in Central or South America. This assumption is based partly upon the decomposition which has taken place in much of the stonework, partly upon the depth of the alluvial and other deposits, which have accumulated since the culture ceased to exist. They're saying you can see the erosion and the wear and tear in the stone, of how old it is, how these monuments, these ruins, and they're talking about the deposits, accumulation of dirt and everything on top of it, like it's years, a lot of years. And partly upon the fact that many of the remains have been covered with volcanic ash. All right, listen to this. It has been covered. Many of the remains have been covered with volcanic ash from an adjacent volcano where geological evidence gives us a fairly adequate idea of the time which has elapsed since it was last in eruption. So they know when this volcano erupted, and it was a long time ago. So for these ruins to have ash over it, telling you that it's old, it's that old. Leaving out the question of the decomposition of diorite and other rocks at this locality, a question not as yet determined, we have the best evidence of extreme antiquity and the alluvial and other deposits. Okay, it's a very old site that has volcanic ash over it. From 4 to 12 feet of soil, 12 feet of soil, listen, have accumulated since the abandonment of the site by the unknown cultured race, which left these mute remains. That alone bespeaks an enormous period of time. For a while, we have no definite data as to the annual rate of deposit. In the locality, we can form some idea of the ages that must have passed since the prehistoric people, all right, prehistoric people first worshipped and offered sacrifices before their idols at this spot. Touch the hijack. We know that the site has not been occupied or in use since the arrival of Europeans, and hence the thin superficial layer of mold that covers the uppermost potsherds and remains must represent the debris of at least 400 years. All right, so that's all new. Those artificial layers that happened when the Europeans started coming in. Brush fires have probably destroyed a portion of the decaying vegetation which accumulated upon the surface, and some probably has been carried away by heavy rains. But even if we allow 50% destroyed annually in this way, the accumulation will not have exceeded 2 or 3 inches in a century. At this rate, it would require 400 years to deposit a foot of soil, and an accumulation of 10 feet would indicate that some 4,000 years have passed since the first monument were erected. I say first, for it is evident that the site was occupied and used through hundreds, probably thousands of years, for in many spots there are remains buried twice the depth of others, while some are exposed at the surface of the earth. But in every case, the accumulation of soil about them is several feet in depth. The district where these remains were found, and where I carried on excavations for 6 months, is a level alluvial plain, or llano, lying between the Pacific coast and the mountains. A district cut by many streams and rivers, broken by occasional knolls or small hills, and with the exception of the river bottomlands, sterile and wholly unfit for agriculture. It is therefore remarkable that a vast, teeming population should have occupied this territory, especially as the prehistoric denizens of the area were obviously preeminently agricultural. The only explanation is that in the days when the prehistoric race dwelt here, the country was fertile, and that the tufa and ashes from the volcano's eruption transformed it to a barren, almost desert land. You guys hear this? A major cataclysm happened there with volcano. It was a fertile land before that. Towering above the plains at the feet of the Cordilleras is the volcano Guacamayo. All right, the Guacamayo. The broken down crater is still raw and burnt. The mountain still rumbles and emits steam and hot water from its fumaroles, and over a great portion of the llanos there is a layer of volcanic ash, which has not yet thoroughly decomposed to form soil. During the rainy season, the entire district from seacoast to foothills is transformed into a veritable swamp, the streams overflowing their banks and flooding the llanos, while during the dry months the plain becomes baked. The streams vanish or dwindle to mudholes, the scanty vegetation withers, and the district becomes a parched desert country. My statement that this area was once inhabited by a vast and teeming population is based on several obvious facts. First, the immense number of burials, ceremonial monuments, village sites, and mounds. Second, the incredible number of potsherds, stone artifacts, and other manufactured objects scattered over a wide area and often forming deposits several feet in depth. Third, the enormous size and great number of stone stelae, monuments, and idols which could have been moved and erected only by thousands of hands working in unison. Finally, the remains of the culture have already been found over an area of approximately 500 square miles. By this, I do not mean that every square mile of the immense area is covered with remains, but over this entire area remains of the same prehistoric race occur, sometimes widely separated, at other times thickly covering hundreds of acres. Among the remains are kitchen, middens, refuse piles, village sites, burials, ceremonial or temple sites, and mounds. In places along some of the rivers, village sites extend for miles, and the strata of discarded stone artifacts and potsherds are from 5 to 20 feet thick. In other spots, burials are so numerous that it is practically impossible to dig anywhere over an area of many acres without disclosing a grave. All right, so you hear what he's saying. This is what they have there. Vast, vast civilization. A lot of people. These are big, big towns, right? These are cities in the jungle right here. It's practically impossible to dig anywhere, he's saying, without disclosing a grave. They're, they've been raiding all these burial graves. They've been doing that for years. I'm gonna show you a video. Ceremonial monuments of stone are numerous, and there are hundreds of low rounded mounds full of pottery and stone implements, which were probably once surmounted by temples or buildings of some sort. By far the most extensive remains, the spot which so far has yielded the finest and most astonishing objects, and the nucleus of the whole culture, is a huge temple or ceremonial site, which may well be called the Temple of 1,000 Idols. The remains of this vast prehistoric place of worship cover a leveled area between two rivers, an area more than 100 acres in extent. All right, listen to what he's describing here. Although only a small portion, about 10 acres, has been cleared of jungle and partly excavated, this portion, however, appears to be the most important part of the whole, and was probably the central and most sacred part. Although when first visited, the site was overgrown with dense thorny brush, and only the summits of stone columns were visible here and there. The clearing of the jungle and preliminary excavations soon revealed the arrangement and details of the place. Running north and south, and east and west, are rows of immense, hand-cut stone monuments or phallic columns, placed in almost geometrically perfect quadrangle. In the northern row, there were 31 of these, spaced from 8 to 12 feet apart and extending due east and west. 100 feet east of these and 100 feet south were two immense basalt columns, over 15 feet in height and nearly 30 inches square, both of which had broken off and fallen to one side. All right, so all this is very amazing stonework. These are monoliths, ancient architects here in the jungles of Panama, things they never told us about. They just found these in the 1920s. By then, they were already printing their school books talking about Egypt and all that, and Samaria and all that. They hadn't even found Cocle yet, or they were keeping it under the rug. 150 feet south of these, and running due north and south, were 27 columns. 250 feet south of these, and directly in line with them, were two more huge columns, like those already mentioned. All right, you hear this? Where's all these columns? You guys, it's really hard for me to get any pictures or anything of this site. They're really hiding this place. I'm going to show you guys even the gold artifacts they got out from there. They're not really showing anybody in any museum, that much. 300 feet west of these was a semicircular row of smaller columns, 25 in number. 300 feet north of these and 350 feet from the first row of 31 columns were 21 others running north and south. All right, do you guys hear all these columns of stone in the middle of the jungle here in Panama? Thus, the three rows of stone monuments with the two corner groups formed a quadrangle approximately 300 by 700 feet in area, an open court bounded by the great tooled phallic columns of hard basalt, many of them elaborately sculptured, which when the site was in use had been gaily painted, for traces of the pigment were still visible upon them. This in itself denoted a surprising culture and spoke eloquently of the Herculean labor of the prehistoric inhabitants who had cut, carved, transported, and erected the massive monoliths, all right? And again, they won't show us this place. Where is the pictures? Where's the archaeological research? Why ain't this talked about? But as work progressed and new discoveries were made, the wonders of that place increased. The columns in themselves were astonishing objects. Many of them were 15 to 20 feet in length, from 16 to 30 inches square, cut and tooled to rectangular, octagonal, pentagonal, cylindrical, or elliptical form, and sometimes covered with symbolic sculptures and glyphs, which appeared to be characters with some unknown meaning. No stone of the same sort existed near the site, and later investigations revealed the quarry on a hill several miles distant and on the farther side of a large river. To have cut and quarried these stones, even though in the rough they were natural cleavages of basalt, to have transported them overland for miles. All right, you guys hear what's going on here? To have ferried them across the stream seemed an almost superhuman feat. To accomplish the same results with modern devices and equipment would be no small undertaking and would require months of labor. Yet the prehistoric people who cut and dragged the huge columns to this long buried place of worship must have been limited to hand labors, to ropes, and possibly rollers, to the crudest of tools, even though thousands toiled and labored. Years, decades, perhaps centuries must have been required to transport the hundreds of monoliths, often weighing many tons, from the distant quarry to the temple. One marvels at the sublime faith, the sincerity, the belief in their deities that led these ancient people to this task and that kept them at it for months after months, year after year, until their temple was completed. All right, so real quick, I wanted to come to this book just because it makes a reference about the Cocle culture that I think is very important, that's going to correlate with what the last book was saying about how it was covered by ash, and it seems very, very old, all this accumulated soil and everything. It seems very ancient. And it says in this book, Mysteries of Ancient South America by Harold T. Wilkins. And we're all the way in page 98. And it says in this paragraph, I'm going to read the whole paragraph. It says the Mexican code is Ximalpopoca, written in the native Nahua tongue, and already mentioned in chapter 1, seems to suggest that there had been three attempts from some land across the eastern sea to civilize the savages and barbarians of Central America, but that all had failed before Quetzalcoatl came on the scene. This seems to be borne out by the discovery in AD 1927 by the American Indian Foundation Fund diggers of remains of a great temple, beautifully colored pottery. So, all right, so this is when they're talking about what they found in Cocle in AD 1927. So they were called the American Indian Foundation Fund diggers. Of remains of a great temple, all right, temple, beautifully colored pottery, stone monuments, and idols or statues of men, all lying under many feet of volcanic ash, and far more ancient than Mayan or Aztec civilizations. Listen, this is old in Cocle. These remains must be at least 12,000 years old. They were found in the Cocle province of Panama State. All right, where Cocle? That's what we're talking about today. Yes, under several feet of volcanic ash. This is older than the Mayans and the Aztecs. At least 12,000 years old. We're talking about temples, megaliths, pottery, gold. I'm going to show you what they found there real quick. This is just some examples of what they found there. All right, as you guys can see, this is like a double-headed dragon. You see? Just like almost the Asian dragon. You see that? This is the Gilcrease collection and the Gran Cocle. So they have most of these gold artifacts. This is a frog effigy, as it says here. If you guys saw my gold museum tour video, a lot of the gold pendants there and everything resemble, is basically the same as the Cocle culture. So the Cocle might have been the actual center, and extended all the way up to Costa Rica. This is crocodiles. All right. So remember, this is old, ancient, very ancient. They're finding all this right here in Panama. All right. This looks interesting to me. Almost looks like the Serpent Mound. It reminds me of the Serpent Mound for some reason. All right, look at the designs. Thought this was interesting. All right, you guys see this symbol? Look at that. What does that remind you of? And again, I don't know, it just reminds me of like the Serpent Mound a little bit. And it actually looks like it's doing something. It looks like the procreation, right? It looks like procreation to me a little bit, along with mushroom symbology. And here's some more images. Just look at the signs on this. says here a bowl that depicts the carapace and tail of a freshwater turtle, Gran Cocle. So you got to dodge the hijack with their dating, their carbon datings. Again, they're not telling the truth. This was found, again, most of it under ash. Several feet of dirt, several feet. Look at this effigy. Looks like a raccoon. Beautiful designs, very artistic. All right, this is high degree of civilization. People had time to create these things. That's what we're talking about. They had agriculture. They had to have agriculture to have time to chill and do art and construct and create bases. Beautiful. Look at this art and paint it, design it. You know. Look at this one right here. It's like an animal, also like a pickle or cucumber almost. All right, some more designs here. And this says here, these are whistles. All right, I know a lot of these are found in Costa Rica too. Yeah, they had these little flute kind of whistle kind of that the American indigenous people had to make sounds and music and all kinds of different flute sounds and bird sounds. These are some examples of them. These are some original whistles. All right, whistles. Look at that. These are called plates, I guess they're saying. This is like a vase. This is again from Gran Cocle, Panama. This is very ancient. And look at the design, very nice. Now I thought this again very interesting. I'm gonna let you guys look at it a little bit. Let me zoom in. What does this remind you of? Huh? What does this remind you of? Yeah. Some more designs right here. Look at the colors they're using. This is beautiful stuff. High degree of civilization and creativity here in the jungles of ancient Central America. Has to be at least 12,000 years old. You guys read it right there, what they were saying in that last book. All right, we got some more. Look at the colors on this, you see? Wow. So I guess because, you know, you own these things, you want to make them look nice for your house and everything, where you were living. You design your own kind, right? Look at this artistry. Look at that. It's nice. Embossed disc, huh? Looks like a shield to me. So just like the stuff they were finding and bringing Father Crespi in Ecuador, right? They were bringing him things like this. And he still has the collection, right? Until he passed away, and then, you know, the Vatican took it all. But he had gold disc like this, just like this. Look at this arm cuff right here. A golden arm cuff. Can you imagine yourself with that on, and the disc and the shield right in front, and your gold arm, and you got your gold crown, probably got a golden sword. Wow. And it has dragons on the arm. Look at that. It has dracons. It has dragons on the arm cuff, the golden arm cuff. This is a nose ornament. Look at this one. Nose ornament out of gold. You already know. These are ear rods, as they're saying. I guess they used to go through the ear. All right, look at that. Wow, out of pure gold. These are ear spools. Look at that. And they're calling these casts of birds like spread eagles. So dodge the hijack. So again, I want to remind you, I went to the Gold Museum here in Costa Rica and I did a video and we showed the exact same pieces. And I reminded you guys that these were the ones we were reading about in Atlantis in America. They were used for navigational purposes. A lot of this stuff is not what they're telling you it is, okay? They had purposes. These are tooth effigies, right? Tooth effigies, look at that. Put the tooth on the gold piece. And here's another one, a big one. Look at that, wow. And this is a little pendant you put on a chain. You see, they had chains, gold chains and pendants and gold. This is a little seahorse, right? A beautiful design right here. All right, so real quick, I want to bring you to this book. We're going to get into this book. It's a really good book. When we get into the little people that I'm about to get into, a couple series of that. It says here, The Lost History of the Little People, Their Spiritually Advanced Civilizations Around the World by Susan B. Martinez, PhD. We're just going to a part real quick that is talking about Cocle and what we're saying about how old it is. Now it says here, which came first? On the next page, it says, just as old as Turkey's Göbekli Tepe, because everybody's like, what about Gobekli Tepe? Man, we got stuff here that is a lot older, but they don't date it that old. They tell us different dates. They give us false information, or they don't even mention these sites. It's what we're talking about. All right, this is not me writing. This is different people, right? Different books telling you the same thing. Pay attention. It says just as old as Turkey's Gobekli Tepe, too old to fit the current model because it doesn't fit their mainstream narratives or their manifest destiny, their conquest of discovery. Our impressive temple ruins at Cocle, Panama, just as old, okay? Just as old or possibly older, just as old as Turkey's Gobekli Tepe. Our impressive temple ruins at Cocle, Panama, found lying under volcanic ash. The awesome site sports a series of stone images, and like Gobekli, huge engraved columns in rows running again, north, south. Its main temple is a great cathedral. Also like Gobekli, its non-canonical age, 12,000 years before the present, matches that of one of Mexico's oldest cultures, Tepexpan, where a mine detector unearthed the remains of a perfectly modern type of female who could lose herself in present day Mexico City crowds without comment. The Codex Vaticanus, moreover, dated the Mayan calendar system as old as 20,000 before the present, while the great so-called white race dodged the hijack of Brazilian astronomers, so they're from Brazil, white race dodged the hijack, they're in parentheses, you see? Pure race, you mean a pure people? Has been shelved on that same horizon, a highly civilized culture. Okay, we're talking about just as old as Gobekli Tepe. So what are you talking about? Do more research. That's not the only place that's that old in the earth or that they date, right? We have to trust their carbon dating all the time. They found this under volcanic ash though. There's no disputing that. When's the last eruption of this volcano? It'll tell you when it happened, how old that site is. And they know, that's why they're saying 12,000 years before the present. Return to the book America's Ancient Civilizations by Hyatt Verrill and Ruth Verrill. Says east of the group of 27 columns were two rows of these stone images. 6 feet west of the same row of columns was a second line of idols, mainly of animal form. 6 feet west of these was a row of idols of human forms. 30 feet west of these was still another row of human figures, and 6 feet west of these was another row of animal figures. It was evident that originally the idols had been evenly spaced about 6 feet apart, but through the ages many had fallen. Others had sagged to one side or the other, many were broken, and their fragments scattered, while all which had been partly exposed above the surface of the earth had been broken off and eroded. In the exact center of the area, and buried under 15 feet of soil, was a great stone column nearly 20 feet in length, over 2 feet square, and most accurately cut and tooled. The lower portion still stood firmly perpendicular, but the upper portion had been broken in 3 places, and the 3 sections were widely separated. All right, again, they're talking about what they were finding there in the 1920s in Cocle province, Panama. These ancient monolith temples, these ancient ruins that were underneath volcanic ash and many layers of and many feet of soil. Very ancient place. At the base of this central monolith were 4 stone figures. One, a man, another, a woman and a child, another, a jaguar, and the fourth, a bird, probably symbolic of the 4 cardinal points of the compass. Are you guys hear that? Standing here by this central column with its stone idols, one quickly grasps the ground plan of the entire site. For the idols and columns had been so placed in space as to form radiating lines, with the central column as a nucleus, no doubt symbolizing the sun and its rays. At the base of this central monument, as well as at the bases of all the other columns, were large stones or boulders of semi-transparent quartz, okay, or red or yellow jasper, artificially cut and polished and flattened on the upper side. That's wow. Evidently, these had served the dual purpose of sacrificial altars and supports for the columns or idols, for some were elaborately sculptured about the circumference, and one was magnificently carved with a raised edge. worked into the figure of a giant lizard or alligator. Moreover, on several were found remains of human skeletons, teeth, and bits of calcined bone, amongst half silicified charcoal. All right, we're talking about alligators or giant lizards, right? Dragons carved from semi-transparent quartz or red or yellow jasper. Many of the idols or stone figures of this culture are marvelous examples of prehistoric stone carving. In size, they vary from a few inches to 7 feet in height, and among them are representations of human beings, birds, reptiles, and practically in every quadruped of the country. Some show men seated upon thrones formed of coiled serpents, upon chairs or stools held up by smaller human figures, or standing upon conventionalized animals. Several show the peculiar hunchback figure that I have mentioned as cropping up throughout Central and South America, and one shows a Siamese twin figure connected back to back. On one, a jaguar or puma is shown with its front paws resting on a wounded man, while another bears a figure of a jaguar holding a dwarf or child in its jaws. One human figure is represented with one hand stroking a long chin beard, which is strikingly reminiscent of an Assyrian figure. As a rule, the human figures are shown with one hand upon the stomach and the other on the breast, an attitude typical of Tiwanaku figures. But others have the hands resting upon the knees. Strangely enough, not a single carved or sculptured figure is represented with a vestige of clothing, the nearest approach to garments being a cord with an amulet shown about the neck of one of the largest and finest idols. But in every case, the figures have carefully carved and elaborate headdresses of peculiar type. We may assume that the race used no garments, although the presence of spindle weights indicates that they knew how to spin and probably how to weave. In character of workmanship, the idols vary greatly and show not only a perfect chain of development in the art of stone sculpture, but prove the tremendous lapse of time which must have passed between the beginning and the end of the temple. Those figures at the lowest level are crude, archaic, and badly decomposed, while those nearest the surface are splendidly cut, elaborate in detail, and are in perfect condition. In every case, the figures or sculptured surmount pedestals or columns, either cylindrical or square, slightly tapered toward the base and beautifully tooled. The most astonishing of the idols is one bearing a figure which is so strikingly and obviously elephantine that it cannot be explained away by any of the ordinary theories of being a conventionalized or exaggerated tapir, anteater, or macaw. You see, they're saying they even have elephants. They have elephants in the sculptures. You can't say it's a tapir or anteater or macaw. It's clearly an elephant. He's letting you know, where's all these ruins and all these artifacts? Where's the pictures? I'm telling you, they're hiding all this stuff. Not only does this figure show a trunk, but in addition, it has the big leaf-like ears and the forward-bending knees of the hind legs peculiar to elephants. Moreover, it shows a load or burden strapped upon its back. It is inconceivable that any man could have imagined a creature with the flapping ears and peculiar hind knees of an elephant, or that any human being could have conventionalized a tapir to this extent. To my mind, there is no doubt that the people who built this temple and reached such heights of culture in Panama in prehistoric times had either seen elephants, had domesticated some species of mastodon, or were in direct and frequent communication with the Orient and had heard descriptions of elephants from visitors from Asia. Until a better explanation is offered, I see no other way of explaining the presence of this figure, okay? He's letting you know straight up. It's either or. They were alive when the elephants were still here. This is how old it is here in Panama. One of the most remarkable features of this ancient culture is the vast quantity of pottery that occurs everywhere, right? We saw a couple examples of that, right? The burials are filled with it. Closely packed masses several feet in thickness surround every column and idol, and over hundreds of acres it is impossible to lift a shovel full of earth without turning up potsherds. This accumulation of pottery shows, like the stone figures, the development of the culture and its great age. The lowest from 10 to 20 feet beneath the present surface of the earth is of a crude, plain style with little embellishment and usually decorated, if all, with simple, incised designs or rudely modeled ornaments in the forms of animals or human heads. Above this, and especially near the surface, the pottery is of quality and beauty unexcelled with prehistoric American ceramic art. Indeed, the beauty, the coloring, the motifs of this Cocle pottery are the most surprising features of the culture. One has but to glance at the specimens obtained to realize to what a high degree of perfection the ceramic art had been developed by these ancient people. Some pieces might have well come from Mexico, others are strikingly similar to examples from Ecuador, Peru, and Bolivia, but by far the greater portion are wholly distinct in every way from anything hitherto known to archaeologists. Forms representing conventionalized birds, reptiles, quadrupeds, and human beings are very common. Others are of the portrait type so abundant in Incan and pre-Incan pottery, and there are numerous figurines of birds, quadrupeds, and human beings. In shape and size, the vessels range all the way from tiny cups and bowls to large plates, pots, and immense burial urns. Practically every known form is represented, and in addition, there are several types peculiar to the culture. One is a square or rectangular form, another is a globular, bodied vessel with long, gracefully tapered neck like a carafe, while still a third is a teapot-like jar with spout and handle. With very few exceptions, the vessels have annular bases, and in every case, even the very largest ones, 2 feet or more in diameter. All are so perfectly true that it seems impossible they could have been formed without the aid of a potter's wheel. In number of instances, the designs painted upon the pottery are most remarkable and apparently represent prehistoric creatures. All right, prehistoric creatures. One in particular might well be intended for a pterodactyl or flying lizard. Can we say a dragon? Talking about dragons right here. And in some respects show the characteristics of the famous plum serpent of ancient Mexico, like I just said. A dracon, a dragon, the plum serpent, a feathered serpent, right? This plum serpent motif reappears frequently and in many forms, but as rule, the representations of animals are very accurately drawn and are easily recognizable. Regardless of the motive used or the central or predominant figure depicted, the pottery of this remarkable culture is distinguished by the use of a scroll of a peculiar and elaborate type. Sometimes the scrolls itself appear as a decorative design. In other cases, it is used in combination with other patterns, and often figures of men or animals are made up of scrolls cleverly wrought and combined to give the desired effect of a conventionalized figure. But the outstanding features of the ceramics as a whole are the predominance of polychrome ware and the colors employed. Not only do the ordinary colors such as black, white, brown, ochre, and red appear in endless combinations, but in addition there are brilliant blues, purples, soft lavender, pink, orange, and other shades. Green, however, was not used and was probably a taboo or evil color, for green pigments are common in the neighborhood. Alright, so real quick, just want to show a couple of more artifacts from Cocle, right? This site in Panama. Just want to show this beautiful one right here. Just take a look at this. Wow. They'll say that's a crocodile, a lizard, it could be a lot of things. It could be a dragon too, right? But just the gold and the jade rock in here. And then look at this mechanism in the tail. That looks like a machine almost, kind of. Do you see that? And then you got all these gold plates and disc, again, with the dragon symbology. There's just so much, gold coming out of here, and all these metal works out of gold, right? Mysterious golden lords of Panama, right? Ancient pages. Not long ago, numerous artifacts of gold and precious stones indicating the existence of a previously unknown civilization were discovered in the town of El Caño in Panama. Look at this, golden artifacts found in the town of El Caño. You see that? And you see this brother right here? Look at that. And this is some more, as you guys can see. Some more gold designs here. Just take a look at the art and look at the monsters or whatever's depicted here. Very interesting what's going on here. You got all kinds of different ones. You guys can see. This is all from Cocle, Panama. Right, we have the same stuff being found here in Costa Rica. Numerous plates and vases being found here, different shapes. What they're saying here, we're gonna read how abundant this is. It's crazy how many of these things are being found there. There's so many broken pieces that is part of the soil in this area. There's so many vases broken up, so many artifacts, pottery. We're gonna read. Yeah, I just want to show some of the different designs here. All right, this is another little piece right here. This is a carved head, as it says here. Look at this, is very old. All right, this is from Cocle, Panama too. Cocle, Panama. I want to bring you to this side now. In the says here, Gran Cocle, Panama, to capture the sun gold of ancient Panama. All right, we're talking about the real Gold Coast. In case you're not understanding what I'm showing you. Eventually, I'm going to do a very good video proving this is the true Gold Coast. There's so much gold in this area of the world. All right, so I thought this was very interesting here. This image right here, this exhibit. This was originally from the tulsaworld.com website, but it got taken out. All right, there's actually an exhibit in some museum in Tulsa, the Gilchrist Museum. It says here, gold jewelry adorns a display sculpture at Gilchrist Museum in Tulsa World, it says. You see, they never show you so-called Native Americans like this, right? They don't show you people with dreadlocks, kinda little braids or dreadlocks coming out with golden helmets, golden earrings, golden nose ring, a gold chain. Look at that, gold decked out in gold chain. All right, who still does that? As part of the culture. Says here, the exhibit is made up of more than 200 objects from the Gilchrist collection, augmented by large format photographs of the regions in Panama from where they originally came, and life-size mannequins adorned with reproductions of some gold items on display. All right, this is again the seahorse we saw. What makes this show have a bit of mystery to it, said Gilchrist Director of Exhibitions and Publications, Randy Bramer, is the fact that in some ways the ancient cultures of Panama are among the least studied and least understood of pre-Columbian cultures. You see, it's on purpose. We don't know anything about it. That's why I said forgotten people, the forgotten civilizations of Panama. Here's another picture they got here. I just want to show you guys that. All right, you see all gold belt, gold arm cuffs, all that stuff, gold headband. Capture the sun. You see, do you remember who you are? Now, I wanted to show you guys this, all right? It says here in the Colombian or Colombian.com, this is literally what they're doing. That's what I'm saying. They're literally hiding this stuff. It says Panama's pre-Hispanic golden artifacts stored out of sight. Panama's pre-Hispanic golden artifacts gather dust in warehouse. Okay? They're not showing this stuff. They don't want you looking over here. It says here, 9 years ago, a trove of intricate gold artifacts were uncovered at a little-known archaeological site in Panama. The treasures dating from over 1,000 years ago include gold beads, strange ceramic pots, and chest plates engraved with delicate designs in forms such as squid and human face. But since their discovery by archaeologist Julia Mayo in 2008, those artifacts have also sat in bank vaults and preservation offices in Panama City, leaving the country's little-known archaeological heritage an unintentionally well-guarded secret. Unintentionally, huh? A well-guarded secret. So how's it unintentionally if it's well-guarded secret? That has left dozens of startling, beautiful pieces largely hidden from public view, even as the number of visitors flocking to see the country's skyscraper-studded capital and massive interoceanic canal has more than doubled from 1.1 million in 2011 to 2.6 million in 2006. All right, even if their tourism is growing, they still don't want to show it. They could be making money off it, is what he's saying. All right, so they're stored out of sight, golden artifacts. All right, so again, Gran Cocle gold, you guys can see. Look at this one right here. Nice, with the little rock inside. So all this is being found here and hidden, stored away, so you guys won't, put two and two together saying, look at this advanced civilization over here in the jungle. How come they never told us about this? And wait a minute, all this stuff is being found under volcanic ash? This is really old, right? This is really old. And again, look how similar it is to the gold museum in Costa Rica, the same thing we find here. Returning to the book, America's Ancient Civilizations by Hyatt Verrill. In regards to the pottery, as I was saying, there's so much of it. It says in many spots the fragments of pottery and broken metates and implements are so densely packed and so numerous that they form fully 80% of the soil deposit. All right, it's part of the soil. 80% of it is artifacts, pottery, broken pieces. And so firmly have they become cemented together by induration that they form a brick-like mass, 6 to 10 feet in depth. The burial customs varied greatly. In some cases, the dead had been placed in huge urns and clay-lined graves within which a fire was built, thus cremating the body, and at the same time baking the clay walls and floor of the grave to brick-like hardness. There were also secondary burials where skeletons, evidently disinterred from other graves, were buried. In the rear of the semicircular row of columns southwest of the temple, 2 of these secondary burials were found. The bones had long since disappeared, but their impressions in the packed clay and a few teeth revealed their arrangements, showing that the bones had been placed in neat piles with no regard to their natural positions. With the skulls facing east, one of these burials was on a legless metate, the other on a flat-topped stone. Each was surrounded by a number of miniature pottery vessels, stone implements, etc. Near these were traces of human bones mingled with charcoal, resting on a flattened quartz boulder at the foot of a stone column, bearing the incised figure of a man with an oversized head and wearing a feather headdress. Whether the remains were those of children or dwarves, we do not know, but the miniature metate and apparently adult teeth, as well as the crowned figure, would indicate that they were dwarves, all right? We're talking about little people, all right? We're just talking about little people, future videos. Where there were urn burials, they were almost completely covered with fragments of pottery vessels, miniature figures, etc. Obviously, the friends and relatives of the deceased stood about as the body was being cremated and made offerings to their deities by casting their finest possessions into the flames. By far the most interesting and most remarkable burials of all were at some distance from the temple and beside the Rio Grande. There can be no doubt great changes have taken place in the area during the centuries, since the bodies of chieftains or kings had been buried here. Not only had the river altered its course until numbers of these graves had been exposed and washed away as the bank receded, but the entire area must have sunk for a number of feet as the graves were flooded for nearly half their depths. And it is not logical to think that the bodies of the dead, together with their wealth of possessions, were interred with water several feet in depth. Moreover, it would have been a practical impossibility to have dug these graves, often 20 feet in depth, in mud and water, all right? You guys hear this? This is old. At the temple site, very few ornaments were found. These were a few clay earplugs, some labrets or lip pins of a polished black material, and some earthenware and agate beads. No gold objects were found other than a beautifully cut and polished nose ring of bloodstone with 2 ends, where they clasped the septum of the nose, finished with perfectly fitted gold caps. Real quick, right here, they have a carved whale tooth. All right, a whale tooth. You guys understand that? That means they were out in the sea, seafaring. And that means they were killing whales, right? Or hunting whales. Who was the original whalers? Who taught the Europeans how to whale? That was American Indians. But not only do they have a tooth, but it's actually carved. Look at the design on this. That's very advanced. For many years, the natives had been obtaining gold objects from the graves, whose contents were exposed by the erosion of the riverbank. For practically every grave contained an abundance of gold ornaments and utensils, cut and polished beads of agate and other stones, magnificent pottery, and the beautifully engraved bones of deer and manatees, and the carved teeth of sperm whales. No other graves of any ancient American race, not even those of Monte Alban in Mexico, all right? No other place in America, they're telling you right now, contain such a wealth of gold objects. Gold. They were golden chains. Gold chains. All right, do you guys hear? Gold chains. Some of the most minute links. Others of gold beads with pendants, gold collars, pyrite mirrors set in gold frames, gold masks and caps, breastplates, armbands and gauntlets, gold headdress, ornaments, earplugs, labrets, and other objects of crystal, emeralds, and semi precious stones, all right? All with gold. Continuing in the book, America's Ancient Civilizations, it says here, as to the personal appearance of these unknown people, we can scarcely do more than guess, although judging from the fidelity with which they depicted other forms, we have no reason to think that their drawings and sculptures of human beings were not fully as accurate. He's letting you know, hey, there's some of these pendants, right, that look like humans, and you can clearly see what they're depicting, and like, a lot of them look like, definitely could be people they would call today so-called Negroes, right? If such were the case, then we can easily picture their physical appearance. Judged from this standpoint, they were tall, well-formed, muscular. Their heads were of the round type, rather broad, with artificially flattened craniums in some cases, and with features that are unlike those of any known American race, all right? Because they're comparing it to so-called Mongol-like, supposedly Native Americans, right? They don't look like them. Nowhere do we find the heavy, beak-like nose of the Aztec and Mayan carvings. They don't even look like the Mayans in the wall. Nowhere are there the strongly aquiline noses of the Incan and pre-Incan races. Nowhere the oblique eyes of the Mongolian. The nose depicted is always well bridged, straight or slightly aquiline, and the nostrils are narrow. The eyes are full and straight, the lips rather full and thick lips, the chin is receding, and the eyes are set far apart. Whether they were light or dark skinned, we cannot say, but we may feel sure that they wore their hair long, braided or twisted, braided long hair, into a sort of queue at the back, and either braided into elaborate form upon the head or else covered with a cap-like, close-fitting and highly ornamental headdress. Why, it may well be asked, did the inhabitants of these villages and the worshippers at the temple disappear? What drove off or wiped out the teeming population so completely that no descendants have been left, that no traditions or records have remained to tell us who they were or whence they came? All right, Dr. Hijack. We saw a lot of the descendants digging up the site in the earlier videos. All right, they just calling them so-called Negroes or Afro-Panamanians today. All right, so Dr. Hijack, again with the stories that, oh, they went extinct. We don't know, they disappeared. It's the same story, right? Everywhere. What was the catastrophe that destroyed their race and its advanced culture? Unlike the majority of similar questions which confront us when studying the remains of prehistoric American civilizations and which are still unexplained mysteries, the answer in this case is simple. Only by the theory of a most terrific series of earthquakes and accompanying volcanic eruption can we account for the condition of the ruins and remains. Nothing but an earthquake could have tossed the immense stone columns and images about. By no other means could have been broken and the pieces thrown so far in various directions. In many cases, the largest stone monuments are snapped squarely off, while the upper portions are thrown to one side and frequently end for end, or with the middle portion farther from the base than the top. In many instances, too, the largest idols are found turned end for end, with the base of the pedestal uppermost, while others have been broken and the heads of the figures are found fully 100 feet from the bodies. Still more eloquent of the terrific earth movements is the fact that the strata of hard tenacious clay or bed soil on which the idols and columns were set has been lifted and moved so that in places it presents a wave-like surface. Moreover, in many places, a thin layer of volcanic ash covers the remains at the burial and villages sites, and in one spot I obtained several entire vessels and many potsherds from beneath a layer of ash more than 9 feet in thickness. 9 feet of ash. Do you guys hear that? 9 feet of ash. They found the ruins under that. All right, 9 feet in thickness. This had obviously been hot when deposited, for it had been burned firmly onto the pottery. Hence, we can feel more than reasonably certain that the destruction of the culture was the result of an eruption of Guacamayo volcano, which, as I have said, is barely 6 miles from the temple site. Such an eruption must have been accompanied by tremendous earth tremors and upheavals, which probably did more damage than the fallen ashes and red-hot mud. It is not difficult to imagine the terrorized people who escaped from the first of the catastrophe, rushing madly from their raised homes to their temple. We can picture them striving to placate their gods by wholesome sacrifices, by the mad destruction of their most prized possessions at the feet of their idols. We can visualize their utter despair as their tremors shook the earth, the ground rose and fell, and the sacred monuments and images were broken and thrown down. Possibly every member of the race was destroyed by the blasting heat, the poisonous gases, and the blinding dust emitted by the volcano, alright? Possibly. You don't know though. Possibly. But the chances are that many escaped, alright? Many did escape. For at that temple site there are no indications that ashes or dust fell upon that spot. Undoubtedly, also those who may have survived, finding their gods powerless to help them, took refuge in flight. No doubt they had canoes upon the nearby rivers, and some probably pushed off in these, while others may have fled by foot to north or south. Scattered far and wide, they may have reverted to primitive savagery and have completely forgotten their past cultures and their identity as they mingled with other races. All right. So that's the end of this chapter right here, real quick. Just got some images they want to show right here. Let's go over the images they got here. All right, this is a very interesting image here, and going to corroborate with things we already know about corn. All right, what is it? Why is it showing us gold vases from Egypt or this Assyrian artifact? Number 3, it says here a bas relief. This is this one right here, right? Bas relief in Palace of Nimrod, Hall of Nations, Assyria, showing deity picking an ear of corn. Corn. Remember, I told you that was corn they were picking. That's the tree of life. That's corn he's picking. Then it says number 5, gold vessels from Lower Egypt showing rows of maize kernels and tassels of maize, also goat crop god as handle. Okay, this is what they're talking about, the gold. That's maize right here. That's from Egypt. All right, America's the true old world. We brought corn over there. That's why they're showing you this, because they're letting you know that Cocle is older than all this, and we had corn over here. Some artifacts from Cocle. All right, this is the stuff they were finding there. This is not best quality, but you guys can take a look. Sculpture, stone column, and small stone idols, Cocle, Panama. So like these stone columns, right, that he was talking about, they're just lying broken in the jungle. So it's not just any stone columns. They got like the signs on them and hieroglyphics and all kinds of art on it. These columns. We're just looking at ancient Atlantis, parts of ancient Atlantis here, destroyed. And as you guys can see, look, columns everywhere, rocks, columns sticking out. Something big happened here. You guys see the columns they were talking about? Something big happened over here. Some earthquake, destruction. We got mud all over the place. Not the best pictures, but this is what I'm talking about. You cannot find these images anywhere on the internet. They won't show us this stuff. They don't want us to know this stuff was here. Then you got the pottery. All right. And all these artifacts with these beautiful designs and beautiful colors. Very advanced pottery vessels from the temple site, Cocle, Panama. All right, this was chapter 11, the puzzling culture of Cocle. They don't teach us about this. This is a very ancient site, older than Egypt, older than Mesopotamia, and as old as Göbekli Tepe. We're just talking about a part of Atlantis here.